My name is Claude Nations. My date of birth is April 12th, 1921. I was born at Strickler, Arkansas.
And the first thing we want to do is to tell you this is for the Prairie Grove Oral History Project, and we want to be sure we have your permission to use this video interview.
You have my permission to use this interview.
Thank you so much. And tell me, who were your parents?
My parents were Graham and Della English.
And tell me about your family and your siblings when you were growing up in Strickler.
I grew up 4 miles south of Strickler. I have 4 siblings. There were Zella, Roxy, Martha, Violet, and Joy.
Okay. Tell me about your family's business. What kind of business is your family in?
My father was a sawmill man. He manufactured hardwood lumber.
Tell me about that. What was that like?
My father bought logs that the people in the community brought to the mill, and he sawed them up into lumber and sold the lumber for building purposes.
Did you help out in any way in the family business?
I didn't help out in the business until after I married, and he retired, and we bought the business from my father. And then it was called Nations Hardwood. And my father had moved the business to Prairie Grove in the meantime, and it still exists there in Prairie Grove.
Tell me about when your husband took over the business and how you helped him.
I was the bookkeeper at the business, and he and my son, Hewlin Nations, ran the mill part of it, and I was the bookkeeper, and I worked in the office.
What other jobs did you work besides working at the sawmill?
I worked at the water department in Prairie Grove for 21 years, and I quit when he wanted me to come to work. My husband wanted me to come to work at the sawmill and keep the books there. I was doing the book work at the water department, the billing, the collecting. I was the only one in the office.
So what year did you start working at the city water office, and when did you leave? Or approximately, if you remember.
I don't remember, but it was sometime when I don't remember exactly when I went to work there, but my youngest daughter was about 5 years old, and she was born in 1942, so that would make her how old?
It would have been about 38 then when you went to work there, probably.
And then...
Or no, 48, yeah.
Then I retired from that when I went to work at the sawmill with my husband, Claude Nations.
Now, was Claude working for the city at that time? Tell me about that.
Claude was working for the city. At the same time, I worked at the water in the office at the water department. He was the water superintendent for all that time too, until he went to work at the sawmill because he had bought that from my dad, who was Mr. English.
Okay. And what year did you move to Prairie Grove?
I moved to Prairie Grove in 1940.
When you were growing up as a child living in Strickler, what was life like around the home? What would you do to help out with the family chores and stuff?
I did chores around the family home where we lived, and like milking cows and doing the usual things that had to be done on the farm. We had a garden, and we all took part in growing vegetables, and my mother and my father were good Christian people. They raised us as near right as they could in those days. In 1921 was a different world than it is today.
What do you mean by that?
We went to a one-room school through the 8th grade, and that was all the schooling we got until two of my sisters came to Prairie Grove and went to high school in Prairie Grove, and the other three of us, that was all the education we got at that time.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school at 86 Schoolhouse, down the road about a mile from where we lived, and we walked to school and back every day, no matter how cold or how hot. And our teachers were high school graduates, and they weren't qualified now at all to teach school, but we learned what they had to teach us. And then when I came to Prairie Grove and my children started to school, that's when I went to work at the water department, and I had to learn to do everything that there was to do about the bookkeeping and everything else that went with it.
Tell me about growing up. Did you have electricity at your home in Strickler?
We didn't have electricity. We had oil lamps, and we had a wood stove that heated our house, and a wood cook stove that cooked our food. And our little church was also where we went to school, and that's about all the activities we had was go to school and go to church.
Well, what did kids do your age, kids when you were a kid, do for fun?
Well, that's a good question. I don't remember that we did anything very well when we were young. We'd go to what we called a party that was called swinging games, and it was just like square dancing. And that was after we got to be old enough that we could go to parties.
What did the adults do when you were a child? What did your parents and their friends do for fun or social activity?
I have no idea what my parents did for social activities other than what we children did.
What are your earliest memories of coming to Prairie Grove? What was it like when you came to Prairie Grove?
That's when I got married. I came to Prairie Grove when I got married to Claude Nations in 1940, and we moved into a house out in the country, and we raised turkeys and chickens. And then we moved into town, and that's when I went to work after the children were in school, to the water department.
When did you first get electricity?
Not until after we didn't get electricity until after I moved away. We had no telephone. We were just out there.
You mean in Strickler?
At Strickler.
Okay. When you got married and moved closer into town, where would you go and shop? What are some of the stores you remember doing business with in those days?
We did business with the Southern Mercantile, and we banked at the Farmers and Merchants Bank. And that's about all the stores I remember. Grocery stores. I don't remember the first ones. I think the Rutherfords might have been one of the first ones.
Who do you remember from the bank?
I remember from the bank having done business with Delford Reeve.
What was Delford like?
Very nice. Delford was a very nice man and a good banker.
What about the Southern Mercantile? What was the store like when you went in there?
Well, the store in the Southern Mercantile was like a dry goods store and a grocery store. And at one time, I worked there a few months.
Tell me about working at the Southern Mercantile. What would you do there?
Well, at the Southern Mercantile, it was so different then. When people come in and buy groceries, you made a little ticket and you wrote everything down on it that they bought, and they charged it. And there was a little trolley thing that went upstairs, and Viola Hannah was the secretary, I guess you'd say, up there, and she would take the little ticket and send the little, I don't know what they called it, back down for the next ticket. And we stocked shelves and just did whatever there was to do in the store.
Who are some of the friends you remember making when you first came to Prairie Grove that you would have known?
Well, when I first came to Prairie Grove, I made friends with Roy and Lillian McKenzie, Pauline and Vincel Bell, G.E. and Essie Wiswell, I suppose. All those people who have passed away now. Actually, that's about, well, I knew everybody. It's hard to name who all I did know because everybody knew everybody else.
Tell me about when the Wiswells ran the newspaper. What were they like?
They were our good friends and they were good people, and they were good newspaper people too. And when I left the water department, Essie Wiswell went to work at my job there. They had by then sold the paper, the Enterprise paper, and she took the job that I had at the water department.
What was it like working at the water department, dealing with the customers in those early days at the city?
Very nice. That people that I worked with at the water department, that I worked, the customers, is that what?
Yes.
The customers were very nice. I only had one lady that called me a liar because she said I didn't read the meters.
Where did y'all go to church, and what was your church like in Prairie Grove?
I went to church all my life at the Methodist Church on Neal Street. All my life I belonged to that church.
Who were some of the people you remember from church?
Well, they were the same people that went to that church and belonged to that church were the same ones that were everywhere else, like the paper, the newspaper, the drugstore. Charlie Wolverton was a pharmacist then, and all the others were the banker, the same.
Tell me about the different mayors you worked for when you were at the city.
Well, the mayors that I worked for at the city was Mr. Holmes, I believe, and Dr. Rigall, and Mrs. Manning. I don't recall anybody else. I'm sure there were more.
What do you remember about the Battlefield Park?
I remember the Battlefield Park. We went to what we called the reunion there, and they just had food booths like drinks, those sodas and things like that. I don't remember exactly what their activities were, except it was a big thing for us. And I remember how dirty it was up there because there was nothing paved and no grass really, but no buildings particularly.
Do you remember when they first started setting up the park and making it into more like it is today?
I don't remember exactly the date they began to develop it, but it was sometime after they quit having the reunion.
What are some other memories about Prairie Grove you can tell me about? Once you moved to Prairie Grove and married and moved to town, What did you and your husband and family do for fun in town, or what would you do for activities?
Well, soon after we moved to Prairie Grove was the war. And my husband went to the service, into the service, and I stayed home with the children. And then when he came home, he had a disability and was in the hospital for years. And we didn't do much except maybe get together with the neighbors and play cards or something like that.
What was that like being home with the family and your husband being off to war? Tell me what kind of hardship that was for you.
It was pretty hard to, after my husband went to war, because I had never even paid the bills when he left, because I was still a young girl, and we didn't have bills like that, but I learned. And I had 2 small children, very small children, practically babies, and it was hard. And at one time, just to have something, I guess, to do, I sold tickets at the theater. We had a theater here. The Parks owned the theater, and I sold tickets, and I'd take the little children to work with me, and they would watch the movie while I sold tickets. And we'd have show the show about 3 times, and at the end of the 3rd time, and I gathered them up to go home, they cried. They wanted to stay longer and watch it again. But that didn't happen.
Was that a big deal in those days to get to watch a motion picture?
Yes. I remember that was just, I remember just before Claude had left for the service. Well, no, it was before that, I guess. We went to that movie for entertainment. He and I did, and my oldest son, Hewlin, was 2 weeks old. And we went to the movie, and that was about all the entertainment there was.
The Parks brothers were very young when they started managing that theater. How were they as managers? It says high school kids.
The Parks boys were good managers and nice men, and very young, but I don't know just how old they were. I do know that Donald was married to Peggy, and that's about all I remember about that part of their lives. They went to the telephone company when I guess it was their father, Jim Parks, retired.
What are some other stories you can remember about Prairie Grove and the area?
I can't remember much about what else went on in Prairie Grove. I was rather busy myself and raising children and trying to help with the providing living for us, and we had 2 chicken houses at that time right behind our house, and we grew about 2,000 chickens at a time, and I tried taking care of 2 little children and all those chickens all at the same time, And if I took them, Hewlin with me, he'd squeeze the little chickens to death. And Carolyn, I'd wait for her to nap so I could put her in her bed, and it was hard.
Who would you sell the chickens to?
Peter Fox, I guess. We sold the chickens to Peter Fox, and we worked for Peter Fox for a time in there too.
What was it like raising chickens in those days? What did you have to do? Everything by hand, I guess.
Yes, you had to do everything by hand when you raised chickens back then. You had to wash their troughs where they drank, and you had to feed them by hand, and it was a big job.